Last up, we have the 1988 remake of The Blob. The original Blob came out in 1958, so they sort of updated it with a much more, I guess, 80s feel. Well, it's an 80s movie, so of course you're going to have an 80s feel. Story is pretty much the same as the first one. Mysterious object flies into Earth, which contains a blob. It's a pink gelatinish thing that, absorbs people, takes the skin off, decimates bodies in very violent and often gory ways. And there's a bunch of teens who run into this. And I'll be honest, I don't think that most of the teens matter. They run into this, and throughout the movie they try to get people to believe them, and they try to investigate. Then there's toward the end, like 40 minutes from the end, then we have like a sort of a government agency. I don't know if you even know of the government, but they come in and try to clean up this quote-unquote contamination. And this sort of like almost a conspiracy feel toward the end. Almost like The Crazies, actually, if you guys remember that George A. Romero movie from the 70s. But there's a lot of interesting things in the movie. It's definitely a decently enjoyable movie. I suspect the high point for many people is probably going to be the special effects, which are really, really good. I'd actually seen this movie once before, like, 5, 6, 7 years, and I didn't care for it. But the special effects are undeniably pretty fantastic. I don't know, I think it's a really enjoyable, it's not necessarily an amazing movie, but there's some decent actors and actresses, and I think it's a good popcorn flick. Just throw it in a DVD player or Blu-ray if you're a more fancy guy. Throw it in for an hour and a half, have a fun time. And a lot of it may not be amazing, but I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I think the effects in it are, for the most part, really good too. Just to give you some insight as to my first experience with this movie, I don't know exactly what age I was, but I was quite young when I watched it. Kind of in the early to mid-90s I watched it. And I was watching it, recording it off TV. I'm not sure why I didn't watch it when it was actually on TV itself. I don't know if maybe my parents said it's bedtime, But anyways, I was recording it off TV, commercials and everything. And to my knowledge, I don't think it really had anything cut out either, so that was good. But the one problem was that whatever tape that I used and started recording from, I didn't get to see everything because the tape ran out kind of 2/3 of the way through the movie. The tape ran out during that scene where they're in the sewer, which is actually quite a really good, scary scene in the movie, I think. It was just after the one kid gets dragged under the water, and then they're kind of left wondering, is he dead? What's happened? So, and that's where the tape ended for me.
It's a downbeat ending.
Yeah. But from that, and I don't know if this plays into it, but from that point onward throughout the movie, which I've obviously seen since because I've got it on DVD and now Blu-ray, from that point onward, I don't enjoy the movie as much as the first 2/3 of the movie. I think when you see the Blob and it's become this huge thing, it's suddenly lost that element, I guess, of surprise. Because you see, even when it's quite big in the sewer, because it's under the water, you don't know exactly where it is, when it's going to pop up or anything. But once it gets to the point where, everyone's barricading themselves in that place and it's so huge, it kind of loses that surprise factor to its attacks on everyone. And I didn't necessarily enjoy so much the sci-fi aspect of it with the contamination team and all that. But everything else about the movie is really, really good. The kill scenes in those first 2/3 of the movie are really good. Especially that one, the character Paul, where he gets covered.
Yes, yeah.
You see him in the hallway kind of with his arm out, and that's really cool. That one really stood out to me. So throughout the first 2/3 of the movie, really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, it just loses a bit of steam for me in that final third of the movie after they're out of the sewer.
Yeah, I guess it's important for me to mention that much like how it was influential for me loving the horror genre, I own the original Blob, the 1958 version of the Blob on VHS, and when I was a kid, I watched it so many times. Being a late 50s movie, it's actually really decent. Well, of course, I'm probably biased, but I don't know, it's a movie that I saw all the time when I was a kid. And when I finally, got to the remake, I just wasn't expecting that much, mainly because I didn't think anything could be nearly as good as the Blob. it's worth mentioning that The Blob, much like some other really popular 80s remakes that came out, such as The Thing, which a lot of people consider one of the best horror movies ever made, and there's also Jeff Goldblum's The Fly. I actually, for all three movies, I actually think the originals are better. Of course, I always expect hate for treats sent my way. I'm okay with that. The Blob, the remake of The Blob is still a really enjoyable, really fun movie. Like Chucky says, first two thoughts are fantastic. I agree it loses steam toward the end. I don't know if I have exactly the same reasons, but I certainly do feel that once the monster becomes this really big, giant thing, it doesn't work as well. I don't know, I think part of the appeal was that it just sucking people through like these small pipes and stuff. I mean, there's some really painful looking scenes in this movie, and it helps that the special effects are really dang good. I also have to say the ending, like the last scene. I don't know if it's like a plot twist, but that scene, I sort of like aspects of it, but overall it didn't really do much for me.
I guess it's just I'm not a huge sci-fi guy. I'm not sure if you are, but it does become like it starts out like a horror movie, then it starts becoming more and more sci-fi as it moves along, and I think that's for me a part of the reason why it does trail off a little bit as it gets towards its conclusion.
One thing I also want to throw in there, and I know I'm always like bringing up actors, but a lot of times it doesn't necessarily change the movie for me, but I think it's interesting to make mention of. Shawnee Smith, who is potentially best known as playing Amanda in the Sam movies, does a really good with her role as sort of like a kick-ass cheerleader type individual. It takes a little for her to really get going, and she can be pretty naive at times, but I really liked her as the main character. Also, there's a Jeffrey DeMann, who might not be a familiar name, but he was in a really popular movie, The Green Mile. He was also in Storm of the Century, which is one of my favorite Stephen King miniseries. He was also in The Mist, another movie based off of Stephen King's story. And he's an actor who I always enjoy seeing. I really liked him in this movie, but he sort of has an unceremonious ending, which admittedly sort of annoyed me. I thought they could have done so much more with him, and they sort of just throw him under the bus. Or should I say, throw him under the blob. So, okay, I was tough now.
That was terrible.
I'm not sure why I'm so happy with that. But, I mean, it's a pretty enjoyable movie. It's just some smaller things. I sort of like the whole sci-fi sort of government angle, but I don't know if they did the best job. I definitely do like that scene toward the end when when the main character, the town punk, is sort of verbally, going after the science guy, just screaming back and forth, it's not an infection, these people are lying, and the science guy say we should just shoot this guy. It's just I don't know, I really like that scene. I always like seeing fascist governments get revealed to the public, so I don't know. I think the movie has a lot going for it. There were some angles I didn't think worked out that well. But, like I said at the beginning, it's definitely a fun movie. It may not be a perfect movie, but I do know a lot of people out there enjoy it, and I think they have a lot of reason to.
Yeah. I think it could have done without an explanation as to where it came from or what it is. I think if they cut out, that it's a man-made experimental thing, if it was just simply this thing that fell to the earth from outer space or wherever, and it's killing people and they have to figure out how to stop it, and just leave it at that I would have been happy with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because that, to me, that seems like a sort of like a post-2000s quote-unquote plot twist. I mean, I see that all the time now in horror movies, where, it was a man-made, like in half the zombie movies that come out, it's a man-made disease gone wild. I think one of the reasons they did that is to sort of differentiate that from the original 50s movie, where the 50s movie is just an alien, and here they were to, especially since this is going on during the Cold War, and I know there were references made to, hey, we're gonna have the ultimate weapon against the Russians. I think it's really a product of its time in that element. I mean, this is only 4 years after Red Dawn came out, and I don't know if you've seen Red Dawn, but that was probably one of the biggest pieces of American propaganda that exists. So, I don't laugh about it, I know why they threw it in. I feel like it's really a product of our time. I agree that the last third of the movie is not as good, but I don't know if it necessarily, at least for me, I don't think it takes away as much enjoyment as it might for you.
I mean, it doesn't take away a lot of enjoyment. I just think it's the weakest part of the movie.
Yeah, and like I said, I did it, when I first saw this, I didn't go in expecting much, but I can unabashedly say I think it's an enjoyable movie, and I sort of grew up my closed-mindedness when I was about a child, so luckily I've learned from my mistakes. It's torn out as good as the 50s movie, but it's a decent movie.
I did watch the 50s version actually quite young, because my dad, The Blob is one of those things that he watched when, I don't know what age he was, but obviously when he was a lot younger, before I was born. I think I watched the remake first, but I watched the original probably not long after, when I was still quite a young child, so him watching that with me is, how do I want to put this? My brother and father had a lot more same interests than what I had with my father, so scary movies is probably one of the very few same interests that we had. So
when it comes down to it, I think The Blob's an enjoyable remake. It's certainly really gory, it has some great special effects, some decent performances, despite some of the actors not having great plot lines. I think there's a lot going for it, and I think there's a reason that quite a few people enjoy it. It's not my first pick for a monster movie. I'm thinking about my top 50 80s horror movies, and I'm almost positive this would not make my top 50. I mean, to be fair, the 80s was such a prolific decade. So many great 80s horror movies, but I mean, I just don't have the same, I guess, background with The Blob, and especially my very strong nostalgic feelings for the original sort of color my view. Ultimately, I would call the remake a pretty good movie. I give it an 8 out of 10. Definitely recommend it, and it's by no means a movie I would say you should stay away from. It just, as good as it is, I just don't think it can beat my nostalgic feelings for the original.
Like I said, I saw this movie quite young, and I think seeing a movie, especially an 80s movie, when you're that young and enjoying it, definitely helps to lend itself to a slightly higher rating than what I might have given it had I seen it 10, 20 years later. I also give the movie an 8 out of 10. I really enjoy it. It's got some really cool kill scenes, and the creature itself is quite interesting until they over-explain it as the movie concludes. But no, I really enjoyed a lot of the surprising kills earlier in the movie when the blob is a lot smaller.